Hey everyone, welcome to the show. I'm here today with Nick Osborn. Nick, hey, how are you?
I am very good. Thank you, Sanjay. How are you doing?
I'm great. I'm great. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. So a little bit about Nick. Nick's got around a decade in recruitment, in tech recruitment. His last job was at YLD, a really famous top tier British boutique consultancy that's done really amazing things for such a small company, founded by Nuno Job, of course, who was instrumental in the development of Node in the early days. And he's now at PaymentSense, one of Europe's fastest growing fintechs. We're going to be talking about the best ways to hire and some of the best ways to get hired. Maybe you could start off with telling me a little bit about YLD. I mean, what was that like?
So I joined, I think like most agency recruiters, I never really dreamt of going internal. I always thought agency was the way for me. This is, what I was born to do. And then I was having a conversation with some of the team at YLD, and it was obvious that they were going to go through this hypergrowth. And with any amount of hypergrowth, you're going to have some problems, and there's going to be lots of challenges along the way. And I thought, this is the type of role that I really want to get into.
Let's move on to PaymentSense. So this is a really interesting company. What can you tell me about what you're doing there?
Not a huge amount. So we've got PaymentSense, which is a merchant acquiring services company ultimately. So we work with SMEs to enable them to take card payments. To a lot of people, it doesn't sound that glamorous or like it would be leading, from the front in terms of engineering and sort of product design, etc. But we've got Dojo, which is a new product, which is ultimately trying to move away from that sort of B2B and more into B2C in a sense of how we've built it and ultimately why we're building a product. I think often B2B products, from an engineering perspective, maybe they're not perfect. Likewise, from a product design perspective, we're really trying to grab a B2C mindset and put that in a B2B product to help the sort of 85,000 customers that we've got using our product and services.
Let's now move on to the best way for companies to hire people. I want to just really throw the gates wide open here first before we sort of drill down.
Yeah. I think, again, it depends upon the organization. There are some who are very much happy to have a one-stage telephone interview, ask a couple of technical questions, and then say, yes, you are suitable or not suitable, which I think there's pros and cons to that. And then you've got the polar opposite, which is sort of the Amazon processes, etc., where you've got 8 stages. A company like Amazon or Google or Facebook can get away with that because they have that brand. I think most organizations, you have to be very realistic and ultimately not have an ego, because people typically won't jump through 4, 5, 6 hoops for you. So it really depends upon the type of role and the type of organization that you are. I think any process should be a living, breathing animal, ultimately, in a sense of you should constantly look at it, you should constantly nurture it. What you should also have is sort of the regular touch points with the engineering team, or, for me, typically it's the engineering team, and work out, what's working, what's not working. For example, if there's a take-home challenge, what's the fail rate of the take-home challenge? If it's really high, in terms of failure rate, is the challenge being too strict? Are we reviewing in a way which isn't actually allowing engineers to show, ultimately their potential? So it's constantly looking at a process. Too many companies will go, right, here's our process, and this is going to be the process until the CTO leaves, because this is how they want to do it. And it's just only by analyzing the data and really trying to figure out, the quality of hire as much as anything, to then look at the process and see, is this fit for purpose? Where do we need to improve it? Do we need another stage? Do we need to take a stage out because actually it's taken way too long?
I know you've been involved in a lot of improvements, hiring process improvements at the companies that you have worked for.
Yes.
Can you give me a sense of like where you're at now?
Yeah. So like with any company going through hypergrowth, what used to work when you were hiring a handful of engineers may be absolutely fine. It's only when you are putting a lot of people through the process do you start really to figure out where the wheels are starting to sort of, shake a little bit. And it's only being very proactive, and will you ultimately, as a company, you need to accept that you will make some bad hires no matter what your process is. likewise, it's inevitable you will ultimately reject some good candidates. Your process will never, out and out only allow you to hire good engineers and reject bad engineers. So it's being very proactive in looking at the data. And like I said, it's a constant growing animal ultimately. So we've recently had some engineers join from sort of Apple and Facebook and Microsoft. So their mindset, how they want to recruit, but also their experiences are very different to some of the existing engineers. So we actually had a discussion yesterday, just over an hour, about, with these new hires being team leads, how do they want to go about recruitment? What are they ultimately going to look for? And then we started to build out a process for these particular units, because some of their engineering stacks are slightly different, so they don't have to fit, or they won't fit into the existing ways of working. So it's really trying to figure out, sometimes, team by team, what's going to work, what won't work, and then building a process. As much as you can, you want to have a solid foundation so that you can have that North Star in terms of everyone's going to follow at least this type of process. There could be one or two deviations down to X, Y, or Z, but it's a constant battle ultimately. And what I always want to do is try to change things, very minor things, just to see whether it has a positive or negative impact ultimately. Typically, the candidate won't notice any difference. What we don't want to do is overnight change something, and then it means they're set up for failure ultimately, or likewise, that it just means that they're going to be an automatic hire. So it's constantly tweaking it, almost like a product. That's how I try to see the recruitment process. It's a product. You try to add new things, you take things away. Where's the value add? Is this adding value? No, right, we'll take it out. I think too often companies will drastically change a process, and then it's almost set up for failure or success. There's no sort of like in between ultimately. So for me, it's a constant sort of blend of new ways of working, how we review a challenge, what the challenge is. We do multiple challenges. So it's trying to make sure that it's constantly evolving as tech is evolving, but also as the data comes through, we can look at pass fail rates. Is this person a good hire? They are. What was key throughout their interview process that we picked up on? Okay, this, was this built into the process? No. How can we build this into the process to try to make sure that the future hires align in this particular way?
You make it sound really interesting. You make me want to be a recruiter, Nick.
I think not many people understand.
I don't know if you've got a room for a junior.
But I think this is it. Not many people understand, I guess, the true value of an internal recruitment team. If your mindset, and I know hiring managers of this is both more agency. They see you simply as a CV sifting. Here's a CV. This is a notice period. This is a salary. If that's how you're going to use, either an internal recruiter or an external recruiter, you'll pretty much set yourself up for failure. By partnering with the team, you'll get a much, much better process. With a much better process, you'll hopefully hire better candidates. But likewise, what's really key is the candidate experience is positive. So if you are rejecting someone, you can give them really clear feedback as to, this is what we're looking for. These are the areas that we didn't think you excelled on. Here's some extra learning material around X, Y, or Z. Because that's, for an internal recruiter, it's key that every candidate that comes through the process has a positive experience, even if it's negative. And whenever you ask a candidate who you've hired, how was the process? Typically, they're going to say it was good. So the real feedback and the key feedback is from those that you have to say, we're not going to be progressing with your application, and asking them, what's the feedback on the take-home challenge? How did you feel in the interview? Because that's the only way you're going to learn ultimately from the existing process. Where can we make improvements?
I mean, a couple of years ago, you may not even remember this, but for one of your past roles, I actually did a tech test for you. And I loved that tech test because it was so quick. Like you said, it'll probably take about an hour. And it did actually take about an hour. And that was I thought it was a really good tech test that really showed, my abilities. And it was really quick and simple.
Yeah, and that's That's what we're always pushing for, which is, I think, too many organizations, they'll use the take home challenge as a can you code or can you not code. Ultimately, what we should do, well, ultimately the take home challenge should be almost an extension to the screening call with a member of the talent team. So we can sort of see whether you know the fundamentals. Do you follow best practices? Yes, great. You're going to be invited in for, sort of typically 90 minutes or 2 hours. We'll look to extend it, do some pairing. And that's ultimately what a good process should be. I've heard horror stories of people spending 8-10 hours on a take-home challenge. And that's not a take-home challenge. That's a day's worth of work. And when it comes to contractors, rightly so, they're saying, that's an entire day rate worth of work there.
In the last sort of maybe 5 or 6 years, D&I, diversity and inclusivity have become really, really big deals.
Massively. So even in my agency days, and this is 4.5 years ago, we'd have hiring managers or external clients come to us and say, this is what we're trying to achieve. Do you have any ideas? What can we do? And at YLD, we were very fortunate in a sense of JavaScript. We'd partner with a lot of coding academies, which meant that D&I was something that we could get into really easily because we could support the coding academies, which gave us access then to a diverse candidate pool ultimately that we could support. At PaymentSense, it's similar in a sense of we have a core team. They're known as the core team who look at D&I as an organization. And then within the people function, we have a D&I team who look at D&I from a recruitment process. And then we're looking at how we can ultimately improve it and just generally our ways of working. And it's not just something from the top down. I think often companies are saying, well, we need to do it not for the wrong reasons, but I don't think they see the actual benefits of having a diverse workforce and making sure everyone feels included when they're actually in the organization. So I'll see sort of top down and bottom up. So everyone wants to get involved. Everyone wants to look at how we can support and ultimately break down the barriers to entry to engineering predominantly. I think product design, product sort of management, I think that went through that transition a little while ago in terms of getting rid of some of the barriers to entry. So you'll look at the workforce and it is a lot more diverse, whereas engineering, I think, is still on its way there. And for me, what we need to look at, and I often use football analogies for things because it's the easiest way for me to sort of say this is what we should be doing. But for me, we need to be looking at things like from a grassroots perspective, how can we get more into the industry? And then is it university? Is it coding academies? Is it the sort of free code courses that you can do online? How can we support here? Because it's the only way you're really going to increase the number of people getting into the industry. So it's trying to support local initiatives, more international initiatives where possible, but it's making sure that all the companies have the same mindset of there's no point turning the tap on thinking, where are the candidates? Because the issue's at the well in terms of candidates getting into the industry, their awareness of what computer science is, what computing is. And for me, we're certainly on the way there. I've seen lots of companies get involved and have lots of positive initiatives, but it's still a case of making sure that we're reducing the barriers to entry, making sure that we don't have bias in the process, that we have positive action so that we can ultimately support people coming through the process. I think I say it all of the time with juniors coming into the industry. Companies don't really appreciate how much time and support they need. And they'll hire a junior. After a couple of months, it won't work out. That junior's absolutely, distraught. And it's not their fault, ultimately. It's the company's not having the right setup to take juniors on. And I think this is the mindset that companies need, which is you need to look at it from how can we get more into the industry? Once they're in the industry, how can we support them moving forward? For me, it's a long-term strategic play versus go on LinkedIn. We're just going to change our search so that we don't get X, but we get Y come out of a search ultimately. And sometimes that's fine because it's classed as positive action, but we need to sort of take one or two steps back ultimately. That's my personal mindset. I know the great thing about recruitment is everyone has their own opinion on how things should be done. I'm not a D&I expert by any means, but for me, that's what we really need to do is look at how we can get more into the industry. And then, it's internships, it's, working with colleges, and just try to make people aware of the possibilities. PaymentSense, we partner with a local school, and the talent team had a sort of day-long session with them last week, and we were talking about how to write a CV, how to interview, and then we were talking about sort of career opportunities for them and how they could go about these career opportunities. And most of them, rightly so, at the age of 16, didn't quite know what they wanted to do or ultimately how to go about it. So we were there to try to bridge that gap. But if you think every secondary school is probably in this situation, if there was a way to, at that point, at school, say to people, these are the opportunities that are available to you, this is how you go about them, it then can really start opening that flow into the industry. And again, letting people know you don't have to go to university to become a software engineer. You don't have to go to university to do computer science to be an engineer. You can, I've spoken with people who have had all sorts of jobs and then done a 12-week coding academy course, and after 3 years have become senior engineers. And I think it's just letting people know there's opportunities to get into the industry ultimately, and that there's no set pathway to follow. If you've got passion and you want to do it, there will be a company out there, hopefully, who can sort of take that, ultimately the risk, and support you further in that development.
I think you're spot on there with the support part of the picture there.
I said this to a candidate yesterday who's just completing their master's. So they're interviewing at PaymentSense. They've got a couple of other interviews at the moment, and first sort of break out into the employment world. And he openly asked me, I don't know what I'm doing at the moment, with everything going on. Do you have any advice? And I was like, for you at the moment, for the next 12 to 18 months, it's finding the opportunity or the companies that's going to provide you with the most support. For the next 12 to 18 months, you want to be a sponge. That's ultimately what your job is. Be a sponge, learn from all of the other engineers around you. Yes, if it's the right company, if the salary's right, makes life a lot easier, but be a sponge, learn as much as you can. Don't just go with a company that's going to offer you the most money. You need to make sure it's got the right setup around you. And I think the more we look at bringing juniors into the industry, again, the more that will help with D&I ultimately.
Cool. So look, that was a lot of fantastic information there about best ways to hire. Let's move on very quickly to the best ways to get hired.
Yeah.
So let's start maybe with the CV. So like, tech as an industry is really quite different, right, than almost any other industry. It's there's such high demand. So my question is, how important is the construction of a CV as opposed to just the bare bones experience?
It really depends. And I think I put a tweet out a couple of months ago about this, because I think the reality is you could have the best CV in the world. It depends upon the person who's reading it and how good they are ultimately in interpreting the CV. So I think one of the key things I'll always say to people is, when you are sending your CV into an organization, look at who's likely going to read it. And if it's going to be the hiring manager, so, a hands-on engineer or someone who potentially was hands-on not that long ago, how your CV is constructed can be very different to how it's constructed for a recruiter. Most recruiters will do Control F, do they have a keyword? So I think, and what you don't want to do, and I think too many candidates fall into this trap of having an 8-page CV and having every single tool they've ever used on there. That's not ultimately what we want to see. It's for me personally, what I really look at is the past sort of 2 or 3 roles, depending upon how long that is. If you've done 3 6-month contracts, then obviously I'll look further back into your history. But it's not just the tools that you've used or the languages or frameworks. It's how you've used them ultimately. Your CV is the shop window. You want to sort of try and make it as glamorous as possible to entice the recruiter to reach out. And it's on the screening calls. That's where you really go into detail about who you are, what you've been doing, but then what you want to be doing moving forward. So it really depends upon the role. It's always worth tailoring it. You don't want to have every single language on there from when you were doing COBOL development 20 years ago, like my dad, through to the more Golang and Rust. We don't want to see that. The COBOL adds no value. And again, it's looking at your CV to think, where's the value add? How can I make sure that ultimately the recruiter, who will probably be the person reviewing your CV 99% of the time, has that desire to give you a call. And that's where you can go into more depth. And I think there's still a lot of learning to be done from the recruitment side as to what to look for when it comes to a CV, and trying to connect. A great recruiter is able to connect dots that aren't potentially there on the CV just through experience by sitting in on interviews and thinking, well, if you've used this, the likelihood is you've used that. So I'll give you a call, benefit of the doubt, and just be open with that. And the candidate can say, yes, I've used it. No, I've not used it. And then depending upon which answer it is, you can either say, well, okay, it's not going to be right, or great, thought that may be the case. So it's always for me about tailoring it to the company. And then, something a lot of job specs will have is a list of 15 things to say, you must have used this, you must have used that. If you want, add them onto your CV. If the recruiter's keyword searching, it's going to be valuable and hopefully help you.
So you mentioned it there, and that is going to be my next question about that first call. Like, when we get you on the phone, how do we impress you? How do we get through you to the next stage?
So I think what's key here is, and again, it's from both sides. I think for any process to be successful, you need both sides to go in with as much transparency and honesty as possible. If we say to you, have you used X? And you say yes, and then we take you through to interview, we'll find out very quickly whether you've used X or not ultimately. And it is just being very clear and honest as to the reasons why you're looking to leave that organization. Again, the job of, in particular, the internal recruiter isn't to qualify everyone into the process. We don't want that. We do want to qualify people out. So if you turn around and say, being a senior engineer for 10 years, really want to move into a team lead role, want to get into, people management, we can very quickly turn around and say, this isn't actually the right role for you. There's no people management. That's probably not on the radar for the next 18 months to 2 years. If a team lead role, pops up, we'll loop back around and have a conversation. So it's trying to relate your experience to what that organization is looking for, but then it's just being very clear and transparent as to what you as a candidate actually want, especially when it comes to permanent. For me, there's a few sort of key milestones in most people's life. It's moving house, or what's the sort of stressful pieces. It's moving house. Having children, getting dogs is particularly stressful, as I realized last year. But moving jobs is very stressful. So you want to make sure that as a candidate, you're going to be happy, because most, when moving perm roles, you don't want to move every 6 months. You don't want to keep kissing lots of frogs until you find that dream role. Sometimes it's worth not jumping on the first opportunity that presents itself and really trying to figure out whether this role is right for you. And again, the recruiter should help you with that. We shouldn't paint everything as the perfect, happy path. We should say, hey, this is who we are. This is how we work. How does this align to what you're currently doing, but also what you want to be doing moving forward? And most candidates from my side really respect that honesty, and most recruiters will as well. Hiring someone into the wrong role, it just causes us more issues and headaches further down the line. So we'd rather not hire someone. And likewise, I'm sure, I wouldn't want to join the wrong company and then have to search for a job another 6 months, 12 months later because it didn't work out. No matter how transparent you are, that can happen. It's just part of life. you'll make the wrong decision at some point. But it's that honesty, transparency, relating your current experience, but also your desires moving forward into that particular position. And it's having that agreement of whether it's the right opportunity and right company ultimately.
All right, brilliant. Nick, before I let you go, I need the joke of the show.
Yeah, like I said, I did have to ask the team yesterday for a joke, so I can't take full credit for this. But I've got a great joke about a fence. I won't tell you it though, because you'll never get over it.
Hey, nice one. I've never heard that one before.
Nor have I, to be honest. That's
Brilliant.
why I thought I'd better use that one.
And that's all, folks. Thanks a lot for tuning in. For more info, for questions, comments, or feedback, please head on over to aheadintech.com and don't forget to subscribe.